My name is Margaret, and the first time I walked into that barn, I swore my knees would give out from under me. My husband had warned me again and again for decades. Never go to the barn, Margaret. Promise me. He said it with such intensity that I obeyed even when my curiosity burned like a flame. But when I finally crossed that threshold after his death, the air itself seemed to freeze. Dust swirled through shafts of pale light, cobwebs clung to my hair, and the silence was so thick I could hear the pounding of my own heart. What I saw that day shattered the life I thought I knew. But before I tell you what I found inside, I have to begin where it all started on the morning I buried my husband. The funeral was small, quiet, the way he would have wanted. A few neighbors came, and his brother Thomas stood stiff at the back of the church, barely meeting my eyes. My daughter Emily clutched my hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She was grown now with children of her own, but that day she seemed like a little girl again. The priest's voice was steady, but the words felt far away, muffled, as though I were listening underwater. When the final hymn ended, I walked alone to his grave. The air was cold, the grass damp under my heels. I whispered to him, as I often did in life, "I'll keep my promises. I won't touch the barn." My voice cracked on the last word. But something inside me shifted even then. Because with him gone, I couldn't ignore the questions anymore. Why did he guard that rotting building with such ferocity? What secret was he keeping? A week later, I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of papers, the will, the deed, and notes from the lawyer. The barn was officially mine now. "You can do whatever you wish with it, Mrs. Caldwell," the lawyer had said, adjusting his glasses. "Tear it down, sell it, restore it. It's up to you." I remember staring out the kitchen window at the silhouette of that barn. Its roof sagged, its wooden slats warped and gray. The weeds had climbed so high they nearly swallowed the walls. To any passerby, it looked like a ruin, nothing more. But to me, it was a monument to decades of silence. Emily came in just then, setting her coffee on the table. "Mom, you should let it go. Just tear the thing down. Dad's gone, and whatever's in there isn't worth dragging yourself through more grief." Her words stung, though she didn't mean them to. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think it was just an eyesore, a piece of dead wood. But every bone in my body told me otherwise. 2 days later, I hired a man with a bulldozer. He was supposed to come in the morning to start dismantling the structure. The night before, I walked out to the barn one last time, planning to take a picture before it vanished. The evening air was heavy with the smell of rain. The grass was slick, crickets chirped in the tall weeds. I approached the barn slowly, the way one approaches a grave. The padlock that had sealed the door for years hung twisted, rusted beyond use. I brushed my hand over it, expecting it to crumble. That's when the door moved. At first I thought it was the wind, but the night was still. Slowly, agonizingly, the heavy wooden door creaked open just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness inside. My heart lurched. I staggered back, convinced for a moment that I'd imagined it. But no, the door stood ajar, waiting. I could feel the pull of that darkness, as though the barn itself had been holding its breath for years and had finally exhaled. My husband's voice echoed in my memory. "Never go to the barn." I should have turned back. I should have walked away, called the bulldozer in the morning, and let the secret rot with him in the ground. But grief does strange things to a person. It sharpens curiosity into desperation. It makes silence unbearable. I reached out with trembling fingers, pushed the door open wider, and stepped inside. The air hit me first, damp, stale, tinged with oil, and something else, something metallic. Dust floated in the beams of moonlight that cut through broken slats in the walls. My shoes crunched over straw so old it disintegrated underfoot. The smell carried memories of my childhood on my father's farm, yet darker, heavier, as though every corner of that barn had been soaked in secrets. I took one step further, then another. Shadows stretched across the floor, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. My breath quickened, fogging in the cool air. I whispered to myself, "What on earth did you keep here, Henry?" That's when I saw it, a trunk pushed against the far wall, its brass fittings tarnished, the wood scarred but solid. It bore his initials HC, as if he wanted me to know it was his and his alone. My knees buckled and I sank to the ground, unable to look away. Because in that moment I realized my husband had built his life on secrets, and now they belonged to me. The next morning I woke with the taste of dust still clinging to my throat. Sleep had been shallow, fractured by dreams of doors creaking open and voices whispering my name. I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, replaying the image of that trunk in the barn, his initials carved into the wood, daring me to open it. When the sun rose pale and weak through the curtains, I forced myself out of bed. The house felt different now, as if every room held its breath, waiting for me to decide what I would do. I tried to distract myself with chores, folding laundry, scrubbing the sink, watering the plants on the windowsill. But every time I glanced out back, my eyes found the silhouette of that barn. It seemed to loom closer, pulling me toward it like a magnet. By mid-morning, I couldn't stand it anymore. I slipped on my boots, grabbed a flashlight, and walked out through the dew-damp grass. My pulse was loud in my ears, steady and unrelenting. The barn door still hung open just as I had left it. I hesitated at the threshold, almost expecting Henry's voice to thunder out of nowhere. "I told you never to go in there?" But there was only silence, thick, heavy, and waiting. I stepped inside again. The light of day revealed more than I'd seen the night before. The barn was cavernous, its beams sagging but sturdy. Sunlight leaked through gaps in the roof, falling in strips across the dirt floor. Dust motes shimmered in the golden light, rising like ghosts whenever I moved. Old farming tools leaned against the walls, rusted pitchforks, shovels with splintered handles, a wheelbarrow half filled with brittle straw. Tarps covered stacks of crates, their corners chewed by mice. The smell was stronger now, not just damp earth and rust, but something faintly sour, almost medicinal. I ran my fingers across one of the tarps and pulled it back. Beneath it were wooden boxes nailed shut, their labels faded. I squinted to read them. Feed tools. Seeds. But the weight of the boxes when I nudged them told me they didn't contain what the labels promised. A shiver ran down my spine. At the far end of the barn along the back wall, I noticed something odd. The wood was different there. Newer, smoother, as though it had been replaced more recently than the rest of the structure. I stepped closer, brushing away cobwebs. Faint marks carved into the wood caught my eye. Not words exactly, but symbols. Circles intersecting lines, arrows pointing in different directions. I whispered to myself, "Henry, what were you doing out here?" Leaning closer, I caught a glimmer of something tucked between two beams, a photograph. My fingers trembled as I pulled it free. It was black and white, the edges curled with age. In the photo, a group of men stood proudly in front of the barn. And there, unmistakably, was my husband, decades younger, his arm around a man I didn't recognize. Both were smiling, but the smile in Henry's eyes was thin, guarded. I pressed the photo to my chest, my breath quickening. Henry had always been secretive about his youth, dismissing my questions with a wave of his hand. And here was a piece of that missing puzzle. The sound of wood shifting startled me. I turned quickly, heart hammering, and saw nothing, just the barn settling, perhaps. Still, my nerves prickled. That's when my gaze fell again on the trunk. It sat in the corner, half in shadow, waiting. Its brass fittings caught the light like dull fire. I crouched in front of it, brushing away a layer of dust. The lock was simple, old-fashioned and corroded. My fingers shook as I tugged at it, but it wouldn't give. "Of course," I muttered. "You'd never make it easy." I sat back on my heels, staring at the trunk. Around me, the barn seemed to close in shadows, lengthening as clouds covered the sun. I remembered the lawyer's words, "Do whatever you wish with it." I remembered Emily's plea, "Just tear it down, Mom." But something deep in my chest urged me on. I wasn't ready to stop. not when I'd come this far. I stood and began searching the barn more thoroughly, hoping for a key. My boots crunched through straw and gravel as I moved from crate to crate. I pried one box open with a rusty crowbar only to find it filled with folded tarps. Another held empty bottles, their labels peeled away. At last, behind a stack of warped planks, I discovered a small wooden chest no larger than a bread box. It was unlocked. Inside were scattered items: a pocket knife, a silver lighter, a handful of coins. And nestled beneath them all, a ring of keys bound by a frayed leather strap. I clutched them tight, my pulse racing. Returning to the trunk, I tried each key in turn. One after another, they failed: too small, too large, too new. At last, near the end, a heavy iron key slid into the lock. My breath caught as I turned it. With a groan of old metal, the lock clicked open. I froze. My fingers rested on the latch, but I couldn't bring myself to lift it just yet. I thought of Henry again, the way he'd avoided questions, the stern tone in his voice when he warned me. Part of me longed to close the trunk and walk away, to leave the past buried. But I knew I wouldn't. I lifted the latch. The trunk creaked open. Inside, I saw bundles of letters tied with twine, their paper-yellowed ink faded. Journals stacked neatly beside them. A child's toy horse, wooden and worn smooth. A pocket watch. A folded piece of lace that looked like part of a veil. And resting on top of it all, a small envelope with my name written in Henry's hand. I gasped, covering my mouth with trembling fingers. The barn wasn't just a place he wanted to keep me away from. It was a vault, a sanctuary for his secrets. And now, whether I was ready or not, I was about to open them all. I sat cross-legged on the barn's dirt floor, staring at the envelope with my name. My hands trembled so violently I was afraid I might tear it before I even opened it. The ink of my name, Margaret, was faded, but unmistakably Henry's neat script. He had left this for me. I hesitated. For a long while I just held it, listening to the barn's creaks and groans, the whisper of wind pushing through the gaps in the walls. Finally, I slid my finger under the flap and pulled the letter free. The paper crackled as I unfolded it. "My dearest Margaret," it began. I felt my throat tighten. Henry had never been a man of flowery words. His notes over the years had been practical, clipped. Yet here his handwriting seemed softer, almost vulnerable. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone. I know you must be angry, confused. There are truths I have hidden from you, not because I did not love you, but because I loved you too much. The barn was my burden. I could not ask you to carry it in life. But now, Margaret, you must know everything." I read those lines again and again until the words blurred. My tears smudged the ink. Beneath the envelope lay bundles of letters tied in twine. They smelled of smoke and mildew, but when I loosened one bundle, the words inside were crisp enough to read. They weren't addressed to me. They were addressed to a man named Samuel. "Sam, the work is harder now. The nights grow longer and I fear discovery. I wish you were here to help me finish what we started." My heart hammered. Who was Samuel? A brother? A friend? Why had Henry never spoken his name? Each letter carried the same tone: urgent, secretive, burdened. The handwriting grew shakier with each passing year, as though the weight of the words themselves aged him. I dug deeper. Journals, 3 of them, leather-bound, the covers cracked. I opened the first one. His meticulous notes filled the pages. They weren't about farming or business. They were about people. Neighbors, family members, dates of accidents, unexplained events in town. Next to some names were crude sketches of symbols, the same symbols I had seen carved on the barn wall. I turned a page and felt my chest tighten. There, underlined, was my father's name. Meeting June 1965. Arguments about the land. Disagreements buried. Trust broken. I dropped the journal as though the words had burned me. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My father had died decades ago. Henry never spoke ill of him, never spoke much at all. But here was evidence of some connection. some hidden conflict that predated our marriage. I picked up the journal again, turning pages with frantic fingers. More names, more notes, cryptic phrases like night gathering, silent pact, do not tell Margaret. My stomach turned. I pressed my hand against the side of the trunk, grounding myself. Inside lay not only letters and journals, but personal items too. A child's toy horse carved from wood, its paint long faded. I held it gingerly, wondering who it belonged to. Not Emily, she'd never had a toy like this. Did Henry have a child I never knew about? The pocket watch was next, heavy in my palm. It bore an engraving inside to H from S, forever bound. That same name, Samuel. My pulse raced. And finally the lace veil. I lifted it, delicate despite its age. A bridal veil, but not mine. My vision swam. I pressed the fabric to my chest and sobbed. At last I forced myself to breathe deeply to calm down. I wiped my eyes and opened the second journal. This one was darker. Its pages were filled with drawings, maps of the town, outlines of the barn, and at the back, sketches of a staircase descending beneath the floorboards. Notes crowded the margins. Protect the entrance. Never let her see. Too dangerous. My heart froze. There was more to the barn, a hidden space below. The sound of footsteps startled me. I whipped around, holding the journal to my chest, but the barn was empty, only the sigh of the wind through broken planks. I whispered, "Henry, what have you done?" The barn seemed to listen. I gathered the letters and journals back into the trunk, tucking the veil and the toy carefully on top. But I kept the envelope with my name. That one I would read again and again until I understood. As I closed the trunk, I noticed the ring of keys again. Some were small, delicate, others heavy and iron. One in particular was longer than the rest, with teeth cut in a strange pattern. My eyes drifted to the floorboards at the center of the barn. The wood looked uneven there, as though it had been disturbed more than once. The journal's words echoed in my mind, the room beneath the barn. I pressed my palm to the floor, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my hand. My chest rose and fell with sharp, uneven breaths. All these years, Henry had kept a hidden world beneath my feet. He had forbidden me from stepping inside the barn, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. And now, with him gone, it was mine to uncover. My hands shook as I whispered into the shadows, "If there's a room down there, I'm going to find it." The journals haunted me. I couldn't stop thinking about the sketches of stairs, the notes warning of a hidden room beneath the barn. For 2 nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing every groan of the old house, as if it were whispering, "Go look. Go now." By the 3rd morning, I gave in. I dressed in jeans and an old flannel, tied my hair back, and carried a crowbar out to the barn. The air was crisp, the sun bright, but as I stepped inside, the barn seemed to swallow the light. The dust, the smell, the weight of silence, it all pressed down on me. I went straight to the center of the floor, to that uneven stretch of wood I had noticed before. Kneeling, I traced the edges with my fingers. Yes, there. The seams weren't natural. Someone had cut and replaced these boards. I wedged the crowbar into a gap and pushed down. The wood resisted at first, groaning like it had a will of its own, but then gave way with a snap. I pulled one plank up, then another. The air that rose was colder, sharper, carrying with it a smell of earth and iron. Beneath the boards lay a square opening and a set of narrow steps descending into blackness. My breath caught. Every instinct told me to close the boards and never look again, but Henry's voice echoed in my memory. Never go to the barn. If he had gone to such lengths to keep me away, then whatever was down there was the very heart of his secret. I grabbed the flashlight and started down. The steps were steep, uneven. Each creaked under my weight. My hand skimmed the rough walls, gritty with dirt and old splinters. At the bottom, my boots landed on packed earth. I raised the flashlight, its beam cutting a pale tunnel through the dark. And what I saw took my breath away. The cellar wasn't small like a storm shelter or root cellar. It stretched deep, lined with wooden shelves built into the walls. On the shelves sat boxes carefully labeled, stacked with precision. Photographs were pinned to strings across one wall, fluttering slightly in the draft. Papers, maps, ledgers, all arranged meticulously. It wasn't a cellar, it was an archive. My knees went weak. Henry had built a secret world beneath our barn, one he'd guarded for decades. I stepped closer to the shelves, sweeping the flashlight slowly. The first box I opened held photographs, black and white images of townspeople at picnics, weddings, town hall meetings. But as I flipped through, a pattern emerged. Some faces were circled, others crossed out. Notes were scrawled on the back in Henry's hand. Ask Thomas. She knows. Not to be trusted. My skin prickled. Another box held ledgers filled with dates and events, fires, accidents, missing animals, even deaths. Each event listed alongside names. In the margins, symbols, those same strange circles and arrows appeared again and again. The flashlight beam fell on one map pinned to the wall. It was of our town lines, drawn from property to property, converging on the barn itself like spokes on a wheel. I whispered aloud, "You were watching, everyone. And not just watching, cataloging, investigating." I turned and nearly dropped the light. On a table sat a stack of cassette tapes neatly labeled with years. Beside them, an old tape recorder. I lifted one tape marked 1979, gathering, and slid it in. The machine groaned but clicked to life. Static filled the cellar, then voices muffled but clear enough. "Can't let them find out. Too dangerous, Henry." We swore an oath. My stomach twisted. That was Henry's voice, younger, taut with urgency, and another voice, low and gravelly. "Samuel." I stopped the tape, my hands shaking. I stumbled backward, my light falling on yet another wall, this one plastered with newspaper clippings. Fires, disappearances, accidents, each marked with red pen. And in the center, tacked higher than the rest, was a clipping of my father's obituary. My breath came shallow. My knees nearly buckled. Why would Henry keep that here? What did my father have to do with this? I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to steady my heart. For what felt like hours, I explored the room. Every shelf, every box revealed more fragments of a story I couldn't yet piece together. Henry had spent a lifetime collecting, recording, hiding. He hadn't been just a farmer or just my husband. He had been an archivist of secrets, perhaps even a protector or a jailer of truths no one else dared confront. Finally exhausted, I sat on a stool in the corner. My flashlight beam danced across the shelves. And then I noticed something else. A small metal lockbox tucked under the table, half buried in dust. I pulled it out, heart racing. This lock wasn't old and rusted. It was newer, sturdier, as though it guarded something Henry feared most of all. The keys I'd found upstairs jingled in my pocket. I pulled them out, my fingers trembling as I tried each one. At last one fit. With a sharp click, the lock released. I lifted the lid. Inside lay a thick envelope. Across the front, in bold, deliberate script, "For Margaret. Only if you choose to know." My eyes blurred with tears. He had left me a choice. I could walk away now, leave the envelope sealed, let the past stay buried, or I could open it and step fully into the world he had hidden. The silence of the cellar pressed in, waiting. My hand hovered over the envelope, shaking. And then I whispered, "I need to know." I slid my finger beneath the flap. The flap of the envelope tore open with a sound that seemed to echo off the cellar walls. My hands shook as I pulled out the contents, a thick stack of papers folded and refolded until the creases were soft. On top was a letter written in Henry's careful hand. "Margaret," it began, "if you are reading this, then I was never able to tell you the truth myself. Forgive me for keeping it from you all these years, but you must understand I did it to spare you, to protect you. The barn holds more than memories. It holds the story of a pact made before you, and I ever met a pact that shaped this family, this town, and your father. I stopped reading the words swimming before my eyes. My father. I wiped my tears and forced myself to keep going. When I was a young man, I joined a group of neighbors, farmers, tradesmen, even your father. We gathered here in this barn. We believed we were protecting the town, guarding it from outside forces that wanted to claim our land. But over time, fear twisted our purpose. Secrets were made, lies told, and tragedies followed. Your father and I argued bitterly about what was happening. He wanted to stop it. Others refused. That fight cost him his life. Officially, he died in an accident. But you deserve to know, Margaret, it was no accident. I gasped aloud, clutching the letter to my chest. My knees weakened, and I sank onto the stool. My father murdered by whom? And Henry, how deeply was he involved? I turned to the rest of the envelope. Newspaper clippings, meeting notes, more photographs. One photo made my heart seize. It showed my father and Henry together standing side by side at the barn. Both younger, both serious, their eyes shadowed. Behind them, other men whose faces I recognized, even now men who had grown old in this town, men who still lived here. I whispered their names one by one, my voice breaking. I thought of church services, Sunday dinners, friendly waves from across fences, and all the while they had been carrying this secret. The deeper I dug, the more twisted it became. Notes in Henry's scrawl read like confessions. Sam pushes too far. I can't follow him anymore. The fire was staged. They will never admit it. I told Margaret's father the truth. He confronted them. That was the end. I pressed a hand over my mouth. The fire, was he talking about the grain mill fire that had killed 2 workers in the 1960s? Everyone in town had called it an accident. Could it have been something darker? And Samuel, his name appeared again and again, underlined, circled, written in margins with urgency. Samuel knows everything. He cannot be trusted. The realization hit me like a blow. Samuel wasn't just a friend. He had been at the center of it all. The pocket watch inscription came back to me. To H from S. Forever bound. Their connection had been deep brothers in arms, maybe more. And then it had soured, turned into betrayal. Henry had lived with that fracture for decades, and in his silence he had made me live with it too, unknowingly. I dropped the papers, pressing my palms to my face. My mind reeled, my heart aching with grief and fury. For years I had built my life on trust. I had trusted Henry with everything. I had trusted the town's elders, trusted the stories they told me about my father's death. And now all of it crumbled like dry wood in my hands. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march into town, wave the letters in their faces, demand justice even after all these years. But part of me still clung to Henry's words. I did it to protect you. Protect me from what? From knowledge, from danger that still lingered. I stayed down in the cellar until the lantern burned low, combing through every scrap. My fingers turned black with dust and ink. Every document added another layer to the story, and every layer felt like a weight pressing onto my chest. At last I gathered the envelope back together, my hands trembling. I climbed the steps, closing the trapdoor behind me. But as I slid the boards back in place, I knew nothing could ever truly be closed again. That evening, Emily stopped by. She found me at the kitchen table, the letter spread before me, my face pale. "Mom, what is it?" she asked, her brow furrowed. I wanted to lie, to fold the papers away and tell her it was nothing, but I couldn't. Not anymore. "Your grandfather's death," I whispered. "It wasn't what we thought." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I swallowed hard, my voice trembling. "There were secrets, Emily. Secrets your father kept. About this town. About people we trusted. About everything." She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "Why didn't he tell us? Why now?" I reached across the table and gripped her hand. "Because he thought he was protecting us. But the truth, it's ours now. We can't ignore it." That night, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling, Henry's words replaying in my head. It was no accident. When morning came, I knew what I had to do. I would confront them, the men in those photographs, the ones still alive, the ones who had lived with their lies while I mourned in ignorance. I would bring the truth into the open no matter how much it cost me. I looked out the window at the barn, standing silent and watchful at the edge of the yard. For years it had been my husband's fortress of secrets. Now it was mine. And I would not be silent. I didn't wait long. By the following afternoon, I had packed Henry's letters, the journals, and the photographs into a canvas bag. The papers felt heavier than bricks, as though the weight of decades pressed down on my shoulder. I drove into town, the steering wheel slick in my sweaty palms. My first stop was Thomas's house, Henry's brother. He lived on the edge of town in the same brick ranch where they'd both grown up. I'd been there countless times, holidays and barbecues, birthdays and funerals. But this time, as I pulled into the driveway, the place felt hostile, its windows like dark eyes watching me. Thomas opened the door before I even knocked. He must have seen me from the window. His face tightened the instant he spotted the bag slung over my shoulder. "You found it," he said flatly. My heart pounded. "So you knew." "I told Henry to burn it all years ago," Thomas muttered, stepping back into the house. "But he never could. Too sentimental. Too guilty." He turned, motioning for me to follow. "You'd better come inside before the neighbors see you with that." The living room smelled of tobacco and old wood polish. Family portraits lined the walls, including one of Henry as a boy. My eyes lingered on his smile, innocent, unburdened, before all the secrets weighed him down. Thomas poured himself a whiskey, his hand steady. "You weren't supposed to know, Margaret. Not ever." I set the bag down hard on the coffee table. "Well, I do know. And you're going to explain." He took a long sip, then sighed. "Your father was stubborn. He didn't want to play along. Thought we were wrong. Thought we'd gone too far. He was going to tell people. And if he had?" Thomas shook his head. "The town would have torn itself apart." My chest tightened. "So you killed him." His eyes flicked to mine, cold and unapologetic. "Not me, but it was decided. For the good of everyone else." I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. "Everyone else," I spat. "You talk like it was noble. It was murder." Thomas set down his glass. "You think this town would even exist without what we did? We kept outsiders from taking the land. We kept families fed. We held things together when no one else would." I shook my head, trembling. "And the fires? The accidents? The lies?" He leaned forward, his voice low. "We did what we had to. And Henry knew it. He may have hated it, but he stayed quiet for you. For Emily." I clutched the bag protectively. "Not anymore. The truth deserves to be known." His mouth curled into a bitter smile. "You think anyone will believe you? Half the men in those photos are dead. The rest will deny it till their graves. You'll only stir up pain. And for what revenge?" I stood, my legs shaking but firm. "For justice." Word spread quickly. Maybe Thomas called someone, or maybe eyes had followed me from the barn to town. Within days, others began to appear, old faces, familiar voices, all suddenly strained. Mrs. Parker at the grocery store averted her eyes. At church, whispers trailed me down the aisle. One evening, 3 men arrived at my door. They didn't bother with pleasantries. "You've been digging where you shouldn't," one said, his hat pulled low. "Let the past stay buried, Margaret. For everyone's sake." I stood in the doorway, gripping the frame. "The past is buried in my father's grave, and I won't let it lie." The man's jaw tightened. "Careful. Secrets like these have cost lives before." I slammed the door in his face. My whole body shook afterward, but my resolve only hardened. Emily noticed the tension immediately. She came by with her children, her face drawn. "Mom, what's happening? People keep asking me what you're up to. At the cafe this morning, Mrs. Wilkins told me I should talk some sense into you." I took her hands. "Emily, your grandfather, He didn't die in an accident. They killed him. The men we've trusted our whole lives. And your father, he tried to shield us from it. But we can't stay quiet anymore." Her eyes filled with tears. "Mom, what if it's dangerous? What if they come after us too?" I hugged her tight. "Then we'll face it together. No more secrets." The final push came at a town council meeting. I walked into the hall carrying Henry's journals, the photographs, the letter. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as I took a seat in the front row. When the floor opened for public comments, I stood. My voice trembled at first but grew stronger with every word. For years, my husband forbade me from going to the barn. He said it was for my own good. After his death, I discovered why. Hidden inside were records documents that prove this town was built on lies, on oaths made in secrecy. My father did not die by accident. He was silenced. Gasps, shouts, denials filled the room. Some council members looked away, others leaned forward, red-faced. I held up a photograph, Henry and my father side by side. "You all knew, and you let me mourn a lie. Not anymore. The truth belongs to all of us now." The room erupted. Some demanded answers, others shouted me down. One councilman stormed out. But I stood firm, clutching the papers to my chest. Henry's voice echoed in my memory, weary but resolute. "I did it to protect you." Maybe he had, but now protection meant something different. It meant tearing down the walls of silence no matter the cost. That night, as I walked back to my car, I glanced toward the horizon. The barn stood silhouetted in the fading light, quiet, watchful. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid of it. I felt its strength. Henry's strength. My own. The days after the council meeting felt like walking through a storm. Some people avoided me in the streets, their eyes downcast, afraid of what I represented. Others whispered words of support, pressing my hand quickly, as though fearful of being seen. The town had been cracked open, its polite surface splintered by truths long buried. I returned to the barn each evening, sitting on a stool in the cellar with Henry's journals spread before me. It was the only place I felt both haunted and comforted. Down there, I could almost hear his voice again, steady and low, telling me what he had carried all those years. At first I had felt betrayed, furious that he had kept so much from me. But the more I read, the more I understood Henry had been trapped. He had wanted to protect me, protect Emily, even as the lies of others closed in around him. His silence had been a cage, yes, but also a shield. Now it was my turn to decide what to do with the truth. One evening, I gathered Emily at the kitchen table. The kids were upstairs, their laughter faint through the floorboards. I spread out the photographs, the letters, the maps. "Mom," she whispered, her voice heavy with worry, "what will happen now? You can't fight an entire town by yourself." "I don't need to fight them," I said, sliding the letter Henry had written me across the table. "I just need to tell the truth. The rest will follow." She read silently, tears welling in her eyes. When she looked up, her jaw was set. "Then I'll stand with you. We won't let his story or Grandpa's be forgotten." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. The following Sunday, I invited neighbors, friends, even those who had whispered against me, to gather at the barn. Some came out of curiosity, some out of loyalty, and others out of fear of being left behind. The sky was overcast, the wind sharp, but I opened the barn doors wide and led them inside. I spoke plainly without theatrics. I read passages from Henry's journals, showed them the photographs, played the tapes. Gasps rippled through the crowd, some faces pale with denial, others with recognition. "This barn," I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled, "was where men once made promises in the dark. Some promises were meant to protect us. Others were meant to control us. And people paid with their lives. My husband carried that weight until it crushed him. I won't carry it in silence. Neither should you." The barn itself seemed to listen, its beams creaking softly as if sighing with relief. Not everyone accepted it. Some turned away muttering that I was tarnishing reputations, stirring up old ghosts best left buried. But others stayed asking questions, sharing memories that fit the pieces together. Slowly, what had been a private burden began to turn into a collective reckoning. I could almost feel Henry beside me, his hand on my shoulder, whispering that it was all right, that I had finally done what he could not. Weeks later, I made my decision. I would not tear the barn down. Instead, I would restore it not as a place of secrecy, but as a place of truth. With Emily's help, I cleaned and cleared, repairing the roof, scrubbing the walls. The cellar remained intact, its shelves and boxes preserved, but no longer hidden. We hung a sign above the door, the Caldwell Archive. People began to visit quietly at first. They read Henry's notes, studied the maps, listened to the tapes. Some cried. Some sat in silence. Others shared stories of their own secrets long locked away. Slowly, the barn became more than Henry's secret. It became a mirror for the town, forcing it to see itself as it truly was. One evening, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in the barn. The sun was setting, painting the floorboards with amber light. I held Henry's final letter, reading his words once more. "Never go to the barn, Margaret. I said it to protect you. But if you are reading this, then perhaps you are stronger than I believed. And perhaps you will carry the truth further than I ever could. If so, know this: I loved you with everything I had, and I trust you with everything I could not say." I pressed the letter to my heart, tears spilling freely. "Yes, Henry," I whispered. "I'll carry it. For you. For all of us." As the last light faded, I locked the barn doors gently and turned toward the house. For the first time, I felt no fear in leaving it behind me. The secrets were no longer my husband's alone. They belonged to all of us now. And maybe, just maybe, that meant we could finally begin to heal. If you've stayed with me through this story, I want to thank you. The past has a way of whispering to all of us, of warning us away from places we're afraid to face. But sometimes stepping into the dark is the only way to bring light. So I invite you to reflect. What truths have been hidden in your life, in your family, in your community? What doors have you been too afraid to open? If this story touched you, I ask you to share it so others may find the courage to face their own barns, their own secrets. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, I'd be grateful if you subscribed so we can walk this path of truth together. Never go to the barn, Henry had said. But I did. And what I found changed everything.